on the show today Dr. Keith Witt. So integral psychotherapist, super experienced. He's got like a zillion hours of psychotherapy, been doing it since before I was born, I think. And, part of the integral crowd, written a load of books on intimacy and shadow and different themes. Actually, I found him because I was looking for a new therapist. And my friend Miles Kessler says, oh, you should talk to Keith Witt. And so I started looking him up on the internet and actually found what I found there, different podcasts and videos, really interesting. So I thought, you know what, rather than just talk to him to see if he wants to be my therapist, which may or may not be another conversation, I thought, let's get him on the show because he's got loads to say. And Keith, welcome.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Mark.
And you're in Santa Barbara?
I sure am. It's a beautiful day in Santa Barbara right now.
And let's say a bit about your personal story first then. So I know it's pretty interesting. Tell us about your early life and what got you interested in development, growth, evolution, the body, and psychotherapy.
I was born in Hawaii and raised in Los Angeles. And when I was 13 or 14, 1963, 64 was a very, very difficult time culturally. And I just didn't fit into it and got progressively more depressed and distorted. And there was alcoholism in my family. And so my parents put us into therapy. That was quite a revelation. When I first got into therapy, it was almost as if you'd spoken French until you were 4 and then moved someplace else and then never heard French again until you heard it. It felt like a native tongue to me. And at that time, my family was exploding. So my parents consulted with the therapist. They decided to commit me. So my father said, hey, I was 15. My father said, hey, Keith, let's go look at sports cars. And I said, sure. We took our 54 Ford and it stopped in front of the Wells Neuropsychiatric Clinic. And my suitcase was in back and they committed me and gave me 23 electroconvulsive treatments over the next 6 weeks, which was a treatment of choice for adolescents who were depressed and distorted in those days. And
while just for our foreigners, being committed is when you're sort of forced to go to a mental hospital. So
yeah, exactly.
Might not know that,
it was somewhat traumatic. Speaking of trauma, but one thing about electroshock is it did clear my mind to a certain extent, even though it gives you amnesia. I wasn't depressed, and I decided I needed to take charge of my life. In retrospect, I was having the death and rebirth experience that a lot of adolescents have in Native society. And so during that 6 weeks, I decided that I wanted to be a warrior and a healer and got out of that hospital, started studying psychology and Shotokan karate. And 3 years later, I had my black belt in Shotokan karate. And 10 years later, I had my first license in psychotherapy and never looked back.
So that you had this initiation, which is sort of sometimes described in tribal peoples as traumatic, but yours sounds pretty full on. And then tell us about the karate. How did that fit in here? You know, I can see why someone with that background might want to become a therapist, but what's the karate piece?
You focus on embodiment on your podcast. And I love that. By the way, that wasn't being done much in the 60s and 70s. It was somewhat avant-garde. I had found traditional spirituality and religion to be empty. When we studied Shotokan karate, it was a traditional Japanese studio. A lot of my instructors just spoke Japanese. And we did Zazen meditation before and after every practice. And it felt substantive. I felt like there was a bodily experience with the infinite. And that guided me forward. I realized that anything that I did in psychotherapy or in the world, if it didn't feel that connectedness to the other world, to a felt spirituality, then it was missing something essential. And so that led me into my study of psychotherapy, my study of body-oriented psychotherapy, somatic therapies. It led me to integral psychology and to studying sacred sexuality. And it led me to the books that I've written, the classes that I've taught, and the psychotherapy that I've done ever since.
Now it's fairly normal for a therapist to be interested in, say, meditation, spirituality, the body, martial arts, yoga maybe, but these were not typical things to be found together.
Not at
until
all.
relatively
Not in the
recently,
70s.
right? Like you were ahead of the game there.
Well, yes. As it turns out, I was. I loved psychotherapy, but there were just aspects of the field that didn't make any sense to me. And I just wasn't going to go along with stuff that felt wrong. You know, and that up to 1973, homosexuality was declared a mental disorder by the APA. That was ludicrous to me, and it always was. Up until the 80s, they said that, you know, if you're in therapy with one person, you shouldn't have sessions with another person. Well, that didn't fit my experience. The more sessions that people had with different practitioners, the better they seemed to do. There's a very, very heavy regulatory emphasis in the United States about you're not supposed to give physical advice or medical stuff.
Right.
That was right. Well, again, ludicrous. It's a mind-body system. So I had to develop ways of saying, look, I'm not a medical doctor, but you might consider looking at your whatever, you know, all the things that we know help people be healthy and happy. Also, it was very, very clear to me that developmentally, that there were certain developmental challenges that people were having because we didn't have certain information in the culture. And there were a lot of things, at least in American culture, that were making people sick. And so I had to gently help people be part of American culture while being outliers in certain ways. That was particularly difficult during the 70s because there wasn't a lot that was known. There wasn't a lot of good data about, we didn't have neuroscience in those days with functional MRIs. We didn't know about intimacy. The research hadn't been done about relationships and about sexuality, about the transition into parenthood and so on. So it was kind of reinventing the wheel. In the 70s, you know, I was surrounded by a lot of polyamory people, and I tried hard to do it. But finally, I said, "Look, I just discovered I'm a monogamous person, so you know, sorry."
Yeah,
I had to apologize.
You discovered that was for you. That was for you. Well, you know, I'd put that on the DSM as a form of mental illness, Keith. Honestly, myself, but you know, that's just how I roll. So let's talk about relationships, Keith, because this is one of your main areas. I was listening to you on I'll say my friend Jason Gaddis' podcast. I like his stuff a lot. He's a sort of a friend from afar. And hearing you guys talk about relationships was fantastic. And, you know, I'm a married man. I've come to realize I'm not necessarily naturally super relational in my typology, but I've come to realize it's just critical for work. And you know, I read John Gottman's work as soon as I got married. I was like, okay, there's something to learn here. So let's go. Let's go this. The people that might be listening to this, how does one choose a partner, a life partner, whether they have a dolphin on the side or not? And how does one stay with them? These are sort of two of life's most important questions. And we do not have any schooling on this. Absolutely. I wrote a book called Loving Completely, addressing these two issues specifically. There's, you know, you've read John Gottman's work. I love that guy. You know, one thing that I love about him is that I went to a conference he was presenting at once, and unlike any of the other practitioners, he got on stage, gave a brilliant talk, and during the talk he said, you know, I think about my treatment failures. It really bothers me. I think about them, and I want to change that. You know, nobody who presents their own system talks about their treatment failures. And that just made me love that guy. You know, I thought, and his system really has, and I told him once in person, I said, your system has the least amount of bullshit and the most amount of good stuff of all the systems that I've studied. It's evidence-based as well, right? Unlike almost anything on relationships you might read in a magazine, he's one of the few who's done these longitudinal studies on couples. It's really worth looking into. Well, right. And also the first 15 years of his life, he had horrible intuition about relationships. I mean, 60% of his hypotheses he proved wrong. Now, for me, I have great intuition around relationships, which was, you know, lucky for me. And so his research tended to support stuff that I'd been believing for a long time, which, again, is a pretty great thing.
So when I wrote Loving Completely, how do you organize all this stuff so that the people can have their unconscious, which is what makes all the calls, interface with somebody else's unconscious in a way that can help you decide on a good partner for you, and then go through the various steps of relationship, stages of relationship. They have a relationship that gets stronger and more passionate over the years rather than not. And so it started for me with having to engage your unconscious by asking yourself 5 questions about yourself and about other people. So if you're dating and a lot of people, at least in the United States these days, about 30% of marriages now come from online dating. A lot of people do online. You see somebody, and after you talk to them for a few minutes, you ask yourself 5 questions. One, is there a spark of erotic polarity between me and this person? And, if I'm looking at a partner, I'm a more masculine person. I'm looking, is my masculine sparking a little bit with this person's feminine? That's independent of how beautiful somebody is or how attractive is. There's something energetic. Is there a spark of polarity with me and this person? The second question is, does this person maintain their psychological and physical health? And when you ask yourself a question like that, an answer will come. Like when I ask myself that question about you, the answer is yes. You seem like a guy who maintains his psychological and physical health. The third question is, if I was in relationship with this person and there was conflict, would they be able and willing to do what it takes to get back to love? Would they be able? Would they have the skills and the self-awareness to get back to love? And would they be willing? Would they be willing to go through the trouble of having to deal with whatever the mess is we were in to get back to love? The fourth question is, would this person show up appropriately for a child or a family member? And I told this to my daughter, she was 16. She says, look, I don't want to have kids with somebody. I just want to date somebody. So what's this question? Why should I ask myself that question? And I said, Zoe, my daughter's name's Zoe. She's 33 now. I said, if a guy wouldn't show up appropriately for a child or a family member, at some point, he's not going to show up for you. Okay? And the fifth question is, does this person have something larger than themselves that they are committed to, something that's sacred to them? Because people that don't have something that's larger than themselves or sacred to them are suffering from a lack of purpose. And if somebody has that or is seeking that, it's a good sign for a relationship. If they don't have it or if they're not seeking it, probably a bad sign. And if the answer to one of those questions is no or maybe not, you don't break up with somebody, but you explore it with that person. You open up that conversation. And so that's a really good way to decide whether you want to get involved with somebody. And if the answer to no is one of those, and you're kind of overwhelmed with, say, erotic polarity, but the person doesn't seem to maintain their psychological and physical health, or the answer is, I don't think they do what it takes to get back to love, probably not a good idea to pursue that relationship. But if the answer is yes, or probably to those, let's get involved.
I mean, it's also just up for debate now what a relationship is, right? Like there was a certain point in time where a relationship, the sort of default was, well, you did it to have kids, or you did it as a sort of practical economic thing.
That's right.
Like it was a sort of pragmatic partnership, economic partnership through most of history, most of the world. That probably still applies, Okay. And then the sort of eroticism came in, and then now that's expected to last forever. And then friendship, I know you talked about this in another interview, just, my wife and I are great friends. That just has always struck me as just tremendously helpful, no matter what else goes on. Yeah. And it's like, is it a growth relationship for people like me who are interested in growth? When I got married, we were like, let's make, growth is really important to us. Let's actually name that before we get married. But none of these things are a given now, right? Like it's all sort of on the table. And some people would say maybe too much pressure there. Like they're supposed to be your best friend, your hot erotic lover forever, your spiritual companion, your practical partner for paying the bills. All these, 10 other things maybe as well. A partner for raising the kids with, of course, is a sort of given for many, but not all. Like there's a lot there on the table in what a relationship's supposed to provide. Is it too much pressure? for a
Yes.
relationship.
It is. It is. I don't know if it's too much. It's a lot of pressure. And here's another source of pressure. For the first time in human history, we have millions of couples that have equal power in sex, equal power in child rearing, equal power in finances. Relationships up until the 20th century were not based on both people having equal power. Not only that, we're having both people have equal power, and the level of consciousness, the worldviews of people are way more sophisticated than they've ever been. Here's a good example. If you tell the joke, the Dalai Lama goes up to the hot dog stand. The guy says, "What do you want?" And the Dalai Lama looks at the guy and says, "I want one with everything." Okay. All right. Everybody understands that joke now. Nobody understood that joke when I was a teenager.
Right. Things have changed. Things have really changed.
Things have changed. Everybody knows what an unconscious is. Okay. So there's this added level of awareness of the world and of relationships. Now, that being said, if we do choose wisely, or someone chooses us wisely, and we enter a relationship where we grow our friendship and our love affair and our capacity to resolve issues, as we go through the stages of relationship, and when you get married, even, you're not just signing up for one marriage. You can have many marriages as you change, as transition into childhood, transition into old age, and so on, if you stay together. If you work on being aware of that friendship, that love affair, and that capacity to resolve issues, and you go, I want us to get better at this, and let's make that a conscious organizing principle of our lives. If two people do that, the levels of intimacy, the levels of love, the levels of eroticism that are possible for that couple are extraordinary. The Taj Mahal was built in response to a love of that intensity. And so that's available to us if we decide to grow with another person developmentally. But it's a powerful container, but also it's a fragile container. And too often that container is injured and people don't repair it. There was a study done in Los Angeles where couples, parents that both worked, spent an average of 15 minutes a week together, not talking about the children. Okay, wow. That's not enough to sustain a friendship and a love affair.
I noticed that with my wife. You need enough fun times to sustain. Like, we just had a house move, right, which is pretty stressful. But it's like we were going into that with quite well resourced in terms of having had good experiences together fairly regularly and making time to go dancing and other things. It's like, so then when you hit the fucking house move, you're kind of in the black, as it were, in the relationship, as opposed to you're stocked up. And then it's like having there's a skill set, isn't there? Like repair skill sets. Like, hey, honey, sorry I shouted at you about that. Hey, sorry I ignored you about that. Let's talk about it. What do you need? Like, there's a real skill set when it comes to repair.
And that it's important to recognize around that is that it's much more challenging and complicated than it appears to be able to notice injuries and repair injuries because of the way we're wired.
Yeah.
Most of what makes the call on us is our adaptive unconscious, what I call our shadow self. I mean, we're constantly reading the environment with all our senses, taking in hundreds of thousands of inputs, and our unconscious is giving us stories and impulses, both constructive and destructive, and emotions to guide us. Just right now, as you and I talk, our unconscious is bringing up material that helps support our conversation. Usually, 7 plus or minus details built around a story that has an emotions associated with it and action tendencies associated with it. Now, on that being said, when our nervous system, and by our nervous system, I mean our body-brain system. To talk about the brain separate from the body or body separate from the brain is ludicrous. They're integrated. It's like talking about the left hemisphere separate from the right hemisphere. Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen in the left that don't happen in the right, but it's an integrated system. When the system reads threat, it creates, it instantiates a state of consciousness. It's called a defensive state. And that's our unconscious deciding that. We don't decide that. Our unconscious decides it. So let's just talk about you and your wife, or me and my wife. I get threatened by something that she says. My unconscious creates this defensive state. Defensive states have amplified or numbed emotions. So I either get blank or I get more distressed. They have distorted perspectives. I get a story that's distorted towards the negative. There's a destructive impulse, usually to fight or flight. And there's reduced capacity for empathy and self-reflection. This is a defensive state. So to be able to remember in that state, my story is probably distorted. I need to reach out my empathic sense to try to understand what's going on with her. And I know that it's been being inhibited by this state. I need to look into myself and see what, with some kind of compassion, what's going on with me being threatened, and then find something that's not a destructive impulse. It requires an awful lot of self-awareness and capacity to step into a new form of being in conflict. Yep. Now, when you can do that, when two people can do that, arguments become, on one hand, incredibly boring. What I mean by that is here's a typical argument that my wife and I have. Okay. All right. Here's a typical argument. Typical argument that my wife and I just had, or would have, is, God, I can't find my hat. You know, I don't know where it is. Oh, okay. Well, let me look around. And then, oh, here it is. And she says, oh, I must have put it there. Okay. I must have put it in this other spot. And I go, oh, okay. Okay, that's a fight. Okay. Why is that a fight? I'm irritated. I can't find my hat. I'm irritated at her because she probably did it. She's irritated at me because I'm irritated at her. But both of us are self-regulating. You know, like she doesn't remember. I don't remember. We find the hat. Oh, here's the hat. And I love you. I love you too. Okay. We went into anger. We understood each other. We resolved it. Okay. That very same thing 30 years ago, we've been together 48 years. I might have acted like a dick to her because she lost my hat. And she might have gotten defensive with me and be all dramatic. And that's what we think about with fights. But if you get
you're going, hey, I'm irritated. I know this relates to something maybe in the past, and I'm noticing my state. I'm kind of in a fight or flight state, so I'm going to take a breath and regulate myself. And she's going, hey, I'm noticing he's like little micro body signals that he's in fight or flight, but I'm not going to kind of empathize with anger and getting it myself. I'm going to interrupt that. And this brings up something about my inadequacy, but I'm just going to put that aside for now and help him. Like, so all that's just going on in the background, right?
That's right. That's right. And so that's a tremendously sophisticated interaction, but from the outside, it looks like nothing. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you see couples that are the great couples that are just really into each other, you know, as friends and lovers, it's like that. Everything looks easy. The reason it looks easy is because they've grown their incapacity for integration and self-regulation to the point that when it gets to be sparky with them, they have their unconscious, their shadow self has grown to the point where you have different impulses and reflexes when you enter a defensive state. And we can grow our unconscious to do that. And basically, that's the measure of any psychotherapy or any trauma treatment, how your unconscious changes. How are you reacting differently in an area where you previously reacted more poorly, and now you're naturally reacting in a more adaptive or beneficial or loving way? That's where you know that you've grown, when those reactions have changed. And that's kind of the purpose. We use that thin film of consciousness that we all have and our ability to direct our bodies to try to encourage the rest of the system to continue to become more complex throughout life. And if we're in a great relationship, we're doing that for each other all the time. And that's just the magic of a great relationship.
And you can do a lot of hours as well, you know, like I might do an hour a week with a coach, an hour a week with a therapist, but, you know, I'm around my wife a lot more than that. And if we're helping each other out in that process, there's a lot of potential growth in that, just in terms of the hours and also the commitment, right? Like if I have a coach, I can fire his ass. Like I ain't getting divorced, certainly not in any hurry. So it's like there's a different level of commitment involved there, a different level of seeing each other behind closed doors. You know, sometimes my wife kind of was like, you know, if your clients can see what you're like kind of first thing in the morning or whatever, you know. And it's like, I know. So it's like there's a different level of possibility for growth there, right? In terms of that person being capable to do that or not.
That's exactly right. And here's a little known fact about relationships. It was discovered by Carol Rusbold, who died in 2011, who looked into commitment. And she went, what do people do that make them more committed and attracted to each other? And what she found is that people, you'd think, I'll get more committed if my partner acts better. I'll get more attracted if my partner tries to be more attractive. Actually, that's not what she found. She found that people that invested in their partner, that gave to their partner, that gave their commitment, that gave their love, that gave their touch, that gave their affection. When they gave more to their partner became more attractive to them.
And when you give more, they get more attractive. And there's a sort of cognitive dissonance type thing in there. It's like, okay, this person must be worth it because I put so much effort in, right? Like,
well, maybe that might be the mechanism. But it was fascinating to see that commitment ran off of giving. It didn't run off of taking more. It ran off of giving more.
Doesn't surprise me in a way. So, all right, let's talk about trauma a little bit. Super relevant to me right now. Going to Poland this week to work with refugees, and then Ukraine the next week. I've got increasingly interested in a lot of the stuff you're saying, but not polyvagal theory, co-regulation, emotional contagion. You know, these kind of concepts of how we spread our state for better and for worse. Right. And I teach my trainers this. I train trainers in Ukraine. I teach them about emotional contagion to avoid burnout, and teach them around co-regulation. So, like, you know, how can I help someone? It's like, well, you know, a lot of it's co-regulation, the state you're in. And trauma seems to me to be stuck in that mode of the relationship's going to be very difficult because the perception and the thinking is hostile. Right? I am not safe. People are a threat. The world is a threat. I'm going to act in a way which is acting as if they're a threat, and that's actually probably going to damage those relationships and make them more threatening.
That's right. That's right.
Like that is the fundamental way it seems to me that trauma really fucks with our relationships.
Oh, yeah.
That's the sort of dark side of everything we said, right? Like trauma messes with all that good stuff that can happen in a positive way in a relationship.
Well, it's useful to think of trauma and resilience as two forms of memory. It's just useful to understand them that way. Our nervous system will decide whether we develop a traumatic learning or resilience learning from an event. We don't decide. Our nervous system decides. Now, if our nervous systems decide an event is traumatic, we'll become what's called sensitized. And it'll take a little bit less of whatever it is that thing is to have more and more of a reaction. And being sensitive, and if we surrender to that sensitization, say, oh, I really want to avoid those triggers, then you get more sensitive. That's trauma learning. Now, it involves sensitization. Those are trauma memories, and then they affect you in the present moment when you're cued. Resilience is the exact opposite. You have a distressing experience, but you learn something from it, you make an adjustment, and you feel stronger and wiser on the other side. A minor example is my wife went to a trainer a couple of days ago, and trainer says, "What do you do?" And she says, "Well, my husband and I walk up Rattlesnake Canyon every week. We do, you know, I practice like you. I practice what I preach." And she said, "Well, I don't go there anymore." And Becky said, "Well, why?" She said, "Well, I went up there one time and I saw a lot of rattlesnakes, and I got so scared I decided not to go to Rattlesnake Canyon."
Who would have fucking thought it with the name? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, well, she became sensitized. And Becky said, and she said, well, how about you? And Becky said, well, we saw a rattlesnake there once. We thought it was, beautiful. And I've had several encounters with rattlesnakes hiking in the mountains around Southern California and Santa Barbara. And so for me, first time I had an encounter, I stepped over a rattlesnake. My friend said, you just stepped over a rattlesnake. Oh my God. And so I learned, I went, wait a minute, I really need to look where I put my feet and my hands when I'm in the mountains. And so I started doing that, and I actually feel safer in the mountains because I watch where I put my feet and hands, and I'm not scared about rattlesnakes, even though I know they're up there, because I changed that habit and became more resilient in that area. Now, I didn't decide to become more resilient. I just happened to do it in that situation. And my wife's trainer didn't decide to become more traumatized. She just happened to do it. Now, if you do get sensitized, if you do have a trauma reaction, particularly in a relationship, if you don't address it, it's like a cancer, because you indulge in your traumatic reaction will make you unsafe to your partner, will have a defensive state indulging their traumatic reaction. You have an escalating conflict, which creates a new trauma. This builds new defensive habits. And this is, after a while, the couple will start making unfavorable comparisons to their partner with other people. They'll focus on what they don't have rather than what they have. And that starts a long cascade into betrayal and separation. John Gottman says there's 23 steps. I think John Gottman's being a little bit OCD, saying there's 23 steps. I think sometimes there's 2 steps, sometimes there's 50
contempt, isn't he? Contempt being the really toxic one, I remember him saying.
That's the killer. Contempt is
contempt for your partner.
It is. And so what do you do about that? You noticed an area where you're sensitized and you go, okay, I want to turn that trauma memory, that sensitization, I want to turn it into resilience. I want to change it. Now, to do that, generally, if you take all the trauma treatments, and there's a whole lot of beautiful ones, and I've studied a million of them and then generated a few, they generally tend to go through 4 different stages. And all traumas are not created. You're working with people who are refugees and involved in the war in Ukraine. Combat, being in a theater of combat, not just having a gun, but just being in an area where there's people who want to kill you, not only traumatizes you, it literally degrades your brain.
When we drove last time I was there, my friend Polish Pete and I, we drove back across the border, and as we drove through the border to Poland, our whole nervous system just went, oh. He noticed it, and he's not an embodiment person or therapist or anything. He was like, what was that? I was like, that's you feeling safer again because you're in Poland. And like, we were already there a few weeks, a couple of weeks, and living there. Like, one of my colleagues was living there, getting more and more closed down in her face. And then she went to Cyprus because she can work virtually. And I just saw her face become more and more relaxed and expressive as the sort of ventral vagal kind of kicks in and the kind of dorsal vagal shut down, kind of pushed aside. And it's like, wow. And she's not on the front lines, but she's in that soup, she's being cooked in that stew on a daily basis.
Exactly. The people that were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, the cooks had the same kind of effects on their brains as the people that were frontline soldiers. War is just such an awful, in 68, one of the things that happened to me, they had a draft in the United States. I was not going to go to war because some government wants me to go shoot people that I don't know. There's just no way that was going to happen. Now, if I was in Ukraine, then I'd probably be out in some unit right now because, if somebody invaded Santa Barbara, okay, I have a reason to push back. But whether you do that or not, and generally people that have a sense of spiritual authority, the people who have a sense of spiritual authority in war have less post-traumatic issues than people that don't have a sense of it. And so on balance, the Russian soldiers are going to have way more PTSD from this campaign because they're all forced.
Yeah, there's less meaning. There's less meaning for them. Interestingly, by far by far the best regulated people on my training last time were two nuns. And everyone just liked being around the nuns because they were sort of, radiantly kind of self-regulated. I call it theo-regulation rather than self-regulation. But it's, as you say, the meaning making is really key, isn't it? The meaning making and the spiritual connection is not something woo-woo. It's something, literally the seats next to these nuns were always full first when people came in because people felt it and wanted to be around it.
Well, this is why the first thing in dealing with trauma is having connection with people that's loving connection with, you feel people who understand your interior self, okay? I mean, it all starts with that. In Israel, when there's a terrorist event, somebody goes to the ER, the first thing they do is call their family and have them come be with them. So it's just the first rule of thumb, be around people that care about you, period.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you're in a relationship, you always want to be that person. Okay, I know that if I'm a good guy for 9,999 minutes and I'm a complete asshole for 1 minute, whoever I'm with is going to define me to a certain extent by that 1 minute of me being an asshole. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
negative bias in their memory. Yeah.
And so you want to have zero tolerance for being a dick. I did a TED talk once. 2 rules for guys: don't be a dick, don't be a pussy, be a good guy. Okay, that was my most popular TED talks.
I'm surprised TED allowed it. I'm surprised they allowed that on a TED talk. Is it up on the internet? I haven't seen it. It's shadow banned off YouTube, clearly.
Well, by the way, when I was doing that talk and I said those things, the people in the audience that screamed with delight were the women, because that's what they wanted from their guys. Don't be a dick, don't be a pussy, be a good guy. That's what we want. Yeah, anyway, when you're working with trauma, there's generally 4 stages. The first stage, of course, is facing it. And the way that there's lots of different ways of facing it, but you have to face the fact that you've had some trauma learning, it's interfering with your life, and you need to do something about it. And you need to share it with someone that you care about and trust, okay? Now, sometimes people have to literally heal their brains to do this. Neurofeedback is used a lot for this these days, and it's being used a lot and virtual reality training is being used a lot for veterans in the United States. They're using VR and they're using neurofeedback to help their brains heal from the damage that's done by being in combat. You have to face that and radically accept the fact that this has happened. A reaction to trauma is often very much a grief reaction, in that I shouldn't have had a bomb blow my house up. That's not fair. That's not right. But once a trauma happens, now it's mine. Okay, I have to 100% accept the fact that my house got blown up and I have to deal with it. I wasn't the person that dropped that bomb, but now I'm the person that has to deal with the fact that that bomb happened, or that my son died, or that my wife died, or that I lost an arm. I have to face that and radically accept it happened, and it's my job to deal with it. That's the first stage of dealing with trauma. The second stage of dealing with trauma is now my life story has shifted, but I'm still the captain of my life story. And I need to direct my life story, my development, so that this event becomes part of an heroic journey to me having deeper wisdom and more strength in some fashion. And adjusting that, the autobiographical narratives of our lives are generally centered in the right hemisphere. And we have lots of stories, lots of autobiographical narratives, ourselves as son, husband, wife, daughter, parent, that kind of stuff. If we have an autobiographical narrative where we're sensitized and weak as a result of trauma, we can work on that until finally we go, yeah, I went through that stage where I was weak, and now I'm wiser, and now I'm stronger, and now I'm more functional.
Hit me with the last couple, just briefly, if you would, because it's something I really want to ask you about trauma.
Okay, the third one is, once you've done those first 2 steps, sometimes people have bad habits of consciousness. They'll just get ashamed, or they'll get anxious, or they'll get pissed. And then you actually have techniques, meditative techniques, and some cognitive behavioral techniques where you literally feel that the state beginning, and you choose another state because you've already done the work. You've already faced it. You've already done the work with your own narrative, and you choose another state. Okay, there's a bazillion Buddhist meditations to do that. That's the third stage. The fourth stage is you cultivate a compassionate witness. You cultivate awareness of your emotions, your sensation, your breath, your thoughts, your judgments, and your wants, awareness of that with acceptance and caring intent. And as you do that, every once in a while, you notice that you're sensitized in some area, or is there some trauma thing that's happening or could happen? And you go back and you go, okay, I need to do the work again. And you do steps 1, 2, and 3 to whatever extent you need until you feel wiser and stronger on the other side. And those are the 4 stages of working with trauma.
The thing I'd love to ask you about, because I know you're a developmentalist, people, listening might know spiral dynamics, Ken Wilber's levels of development, this kind of thing, is the sort of ethnocentric regression that that I've seen happen around war a lot. And I'm seeing kind of happen in Ukraine now. A lot of kind of hardcore nationalism kicking in. All Russians are all bad people. Even activists going after people. A friend of mine who's a Russian tango teacher who's got driven out of a tango festival and she's, very liberal, anti-Putin kind of Russian, got driven out of a tango festival in Krakow. And it seemed, I've had a couple of friends do something quite disturbing, like they kind of regressed to and it's understandable, I guess, from a trauma point of view, but I'd love to hear your take on it. That us and them, is it just the trauma brain thinking in terms of black and white, thinking defensively and almost regressing to a sort of more primitive stage of development? What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, Don Beck and Christopher Cohen in their book Spiral Dynamics, which talks about how people grow through different worldviews. We grow generally developmentally. People grow from egocentric to more conformist to more rational to more pluralistic, and if you keep growing, you grow to integral. And I can explain those a little bit, but the point I'm going to make here is that life conditions create worldviews. If you have a life condition that is more dangerous, your worldview becomes a more authoritarian worldview. Families become more authoritarian because they have to be. You can't dick around. I remember one of my clients was fleeing, literally, her family was fleeing the Nazis when she was 3. And there were soldiers outside, and she began to, fuss around as a 3-year-old. They put their hand over her mouth and literally stopped her from making any sound, which was a traumatic event for her, but they needed to do that so that they wouldn't get caught and killed. Okay.
Yeah.
So those life events create more authoritarian consciousness. Now, authoritarian consciousness has its own rhythms when human beings have that activated. And here's where it goes. It goes to, I want to have a leader that I trust that's going to protect me. And I want to have a group around me that I trust that protect me from this external group that is attacking me. And that external group that's attacking me needs to be defeated or contained in some fashion for me and my family to survive. It's very, very primitive. It's very, very tribal. Yeah. And now, if you're dealing from, say, the Ukrainian perspective, there's an awful lot of people in Ukraine that it's not just Zelensky's a great leader. There is a philosophy of being in the world, basically a spiritual orientation of democracy that we believe in. And that joins us together. Now, this is the kind of the next developmental level after egocentric, ethnocentric, where we believe in this, and these Russians don't want us to have this. Okay, and the Russians are a threat. And when you're in a conformist,
it's a developmental war, it can be seen through the lens of a developmental war, actually. Like that's one way of looking at it. You've got cultures that have made different choices in terms of where they want their developmental altitude to be.
That's 100% true. And what it is you have a red power god, a dictator in Russia who, through force of arms, basically he's forcing all those soldiers to go risk their lives and fight. They've all been grafted and forced to go do this. Okay, that is a one step up from tribal. Okay, we call it a red power god. Like red is the color of that. The next level up is conformist, where we have a sacred belief system that we are committed to, and everybody that believes what we believe is on the inside, and the other people are on the outside. And that's what. So we have the Ukrainians who are in that mode, and then we have the Russians that are in the red power god mode. Now, the red power god mode doesn't work as well for inspiring soldiers. Soldiers are not empowered by that.
Yeah, it's sort of dressed in a traditional view of sort of orthodoxy and anti-Nazi. It's dressed in a bunch of lies to sort of try and make it look like that. But I don't think anyone's buying it.
Yeah, most of them know that's bullshit. And then there's two different kinds of propaganda that Putin is using, both of them. One is he's actually, putting out lies. You put out enough lies, people start believing them, the Nazi stuff. But a lot of the stuff he says, like, don't say the word war. Everybody knows there's a war, but he's doing that to assert his authority over the populace. They go, okay, we're going to do that, and we're going to pretend like there's not a war because we're scared. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how authoritarian. So that's him letting everybody know, do what I say, or something bad's going to happen to you.
Yeah. Like everyone in the West pretending men are women. Well, that's another topic.
That is another topic. I would love to have a whole show about that. That would be great.
I don't want to drop that in a few minutes before the end. Okay, so there's the level of development stuff, but then there's also sort of a regression, isn't there? Because on the one hand, you've got Ukraine fighting to be a modernist democracy, and my friends there very much want to be part of European world, and then there's another way in which, under enough pressure, people go back to fuck them, it's them and us. Like, trauma happens on that cultural level too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And this is just the tremendous corrosive moral effect of war on the human psyche. It is now I'm a martial artist. Okay. So why do people become martial artists? Some people become martial artists because they're bullies. They want to bully other people. I became a martial artist because I was scared of the willingness of people in my world to use physical violence on each other. And so I thought, if I'm in a world where that's going to happen, I really don't want to come out on the bottom end of those kinds of negotiations. So I'm going to go and learn all these martial arts skills. So if anybody fucks with me, they're going to have a big surprise. Okay. So that feeling of I'm under threat, and I want to be ready to do more violence to you than you have this potential to do to me. When that is indulged and amplified and turbocharged by all these weapons and all this other stuff, people regress. And we all have chimpanzees in us, okay? One way of thinking of the world is we're a bunch of chimpanzees with AK-47s when a war is starting. And chimpanzees wage war on other chimpanzees when they feel threatened. And what do? They kill everybody. And are they killing people that they feel as part of their tribe? No. And so what we basically have to do is dehumanize other people to be able to kill them. And indeed, one of the biggest problems that modern armies had in the end of the 19th century is the soldiers had guns and they didn't shoot at the other people.
Yeah, there's a book on this. 90% of the soldiers aimed in the air.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the reason that they did is we don't want to kill other people. But once you start doing it, once you now are practicing that objectification and destruction and feeling the surge that you get, there's a surge of power that you get when you surrender to those dark forces. That's dangerous. And this is what you're seeing in the forests of Ukraine, these people that have been tortured and have been captured and executed. There's not enough discipline in the Russian army for them to stop the
psychopath. I predicted it. I predicted the sexual violence. I predicted the torture. I knew it wouldn't take long. And
that's right.
Russia has a track record of this as a massively traumatized country, but without, as you say, without discipline, and with very low levels of development. And we need to wrap up here now, but just
okay.
Yeah, it's rough. For those interested in the Ukraine project we're doing, they can look up Sane Ukraine. If they Google Sane Ukraine, they'll see the trauma trainers we're training to reduce the level of trauma there, to reduce some of the suffering of war. Of course, Ukraine needs many more things, but that's one useful thing. And we hope to make Lviv, as the sort of refugee capital, the world's most trauma-sensitive city. That's really the vision.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that work, Mark. I appreciate it. Important work.
I'll take that. And where do people find you, Keith? I mean, there's so much more. I feel like another 3 hours we could do. Unfortunately, I have another call, but I'm like, another 3 hours on relationships alone would be great. So hit us up, a few books, a few things to look up. I recommend Jason Gaddis's podcast with you. What else? Where can people find you?
You can find me on my website, drkeithwitt.com. That's DrKeithWitt.com. If you sign up for my website to get my newsletters and my blogs, you can sign up for free and you'll get all kinds of things. You'll get a free copy of my book, The Attuned Family. And you'll get some content that other people don't get on my site. And you'll get an announcement when I'm giving a talk, or you'll get the blogs that I occasionally put out, or the videos that I occasionally put out. And I have my books on my website. I have a lot of videos. I have a web series called Therapist in the Wild, where I get to rant about things. That was fun when I was doing that show. And so check it out. And I have a book on trauma called Happy Endings that's going to come out next year, because I figured, let's recognize what we're doing when we're working with trauma. With any given person, we want them to be living a happy ending at the beginning of something wonderful. And wherever we start, that's the direction we're going. And until we get there, we haven't gone far enough.
Boom. Credit to Miles for putting us in touch. I've loved this, Keith. So nice to meet you. I'll be reaching out for you for other things in another format I've got to run. But Keith, thank you so much. That was brilliant.
It was great talking with you.